Magnum's first is today the first or oldest exhibition, touring exhibition, that is in the possession of Magnum Photos. The story behind Magnum's first is actually quite interesting because it's as well a detective story as it is a photography story. And it was in spring 2006 that the Institut Français of Innsbruck in Austria called me, and the director of those times said to me, well, we have an old Magnum exhibition in our basement, and I would actually like to lend it to my sister, who is the mayor of some little town in Brittany. And she would like to show it during 4 days, during the Journée du Patrimoine, which are some special French days where people can go and visit old buildings. And to be honest, when I received that call, I first thought, well, I don't know, maybe somebody's playing a joke on me. Anyhow, I talked a little bit to the person, tried to find out a little bit more, and then I said, okay, I give you the permission to exhibit this exhibition, but on the way back from Brittany to Innsbruck, I would like you to deposit the exhibition at our office because I would like to see it. And he said, yes, 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 no problem. And I hung up and I forgot all about it. And then in October of the same year, so probably 6 months later, our front desk called and said, Andrea, you should come down. Two people just delivered 2 bizarre crates and they said it's for you. And so I went downstairs and, well, if you have seen the crates, you can easily imagine my astonishment when I saw them, because they look very old and battered, and I then remembered this call in spring, and so I opened the crates, and when I opened them it was like opening a tomb or a grave. You know, the smell was kind of disgusting. There was a lot of dust in them. And I discovered the photographs that are now exhibited here at my Mano gallery. And well, they were not in the same condition than the public can see them today. They were extremely dirty, covered with filth, kind of sticky, gluey stuff. And when I first saw the pictures, I wasn't actually sure if they could ever be rescued, in a way. So I sent away the 2 drivers, and I kept the exhibition at the office, and I immediately contacted a person who is a restaurator for photographs. It's actually the niece of Henri Cartier-Bresson, Anne Cartier-Bresson. And when she came over, she actually said, no, it's not as bad as you think. The pictures just need a good cleaning. They are in pretty good condition thanks to the good printing quality of the time, which means that they have a very high percentage of silver in the gelatin. And so the fact was that after the restoration, most of them came actually out very well. Some have some water stains, but still you can well see the pictures. And then after the restoration, the real work started for me, because I didn't know anything about the exhibition. I had a set of pictures, obviously from different Magnum photographers, and I didn't really know much about the exhibition, because the director of the Institut Français didn't know very much about it, apart from the fact that it was shown 50 years ago in Innsbruck at the Institut Français. So I started with what I had, and that was actually the crates. In the crates there were some tags, and on the tags were different addresses. There was Graz and Linz. So it occurred to me that the exhibition must have been traveling between Innsbruck and other venues in Austria. There was also a tag, I think, that said Vienna. Then there was an old poster also in there, and it had a date on it, so we could date it, 1954. There were the name tags of the photographers. So there was Henri Cartier-Bresson, Inge Morath, Ernst Haas, who else? Werner Bischoff, Robert Capa, who else was there? Erich Lessing, and Marc Ribou, I think. I've got them all. And there were also little wooden panels with the names of each of the photographers written by hand. Then there was a little panel which explained the agency, Magnum Photos, and also in the crates, glued to the top, were also indications how to present the exhibition. Now the photographs in the exhibition were also glued to little panels, wooden panels, and they actually came with different background colors. So more or less each photographer had his own background color, and that was also interesting that already in those times somebody made an effort to kind of visually divide the exhibition into different sections. There was also a little panel with the title, the original title of the exhibition in German, Gesicht der Zeit. It means face of the time. And I didn't want to keep that original title for the title of the exhibition, because in order to present it today, first of all, I thought it would be more interesting to use a different one to make it a little bit more modern in a way. And well, also I'm not presenting the exhibition exactly the same way than it was presented then, because I, in order to preserve the images, I had them framed. And in the old days they were not framed. And this was also a little puzzling, because when you look at the photographs, the panels are kind of odd. some of the pictures are centered on the panels, then other ones are more stacking to the right, others to the left, some to the bottom. Some of the panels have a number, others don't. Some of them have a line. So I kind of imagine, and I think that I'm not too wrong in saying that, the pictures have been in groups on larger panels, and in order to tour the show later on, someone, probably the concierge or the handyman of the Institut, was ordered to cut the large panels into small panels in order to be able to pack them in these 2 crates and make the shipping of the exhibition easier and more convenient. And then doing all this research, it was clear that, I mean, we could find out a lot of things just in looking at the exhibition and deducing from what we had in our hands. But it was also clear that there might be more indications about the exhibition in Austria. So I asked Christoph Schaden, who is a German photo historian, and I needed someone who speaks German, obviously. I asked him to go for a couple of weeks to Austria, to the places which were indicated on the tags that we found on the crates, and go through the newspapers of that year in order to see if there was something in the press about the exhibition. Now, he did quite a thorough research, but he only found, I think, 3 articles or 4 articles, not much. And I think that, well, that probably has to do first with the fact that photo exhibitions weren't really considered very highly in those days. They were not art exhibitions, and the second reason probably was that that year, 1954, 1955, was a Mozart year, and most of the cultural reviews of those days were actually about concerts and about Mozart. So we found at least we found the proof that the exhibitions were presented and that they had an audience, but we didn't really find out more about, let's say, the curatorial concept, or the let's say the curator of the exhibition. All of that still remains unknown. Now the subject also, or the let's say the curatorial concept of the exhibition, is a little bit obscure. There are 2 3 Austrian photographers in that show: Inge Morath, Erich Lessing, and Ernst Haas. So they were obviously in there because they were, in those days, the 3 Austrian Magnum photographers. Then there is a small series by Robert Capa, who had died that year. A very small and unknown series, actually, which I don't know why they chose that series. Then it's a little bit bizarre because even though there are some series which I could understand would maybe interest the Austrian audience. Let's say like the Children in Vienna by Erich Lessing, and maybe also the series on Hungary by Jean Marquis, or the series on Dalmatia by Marc Ribou. The other series, it's difficult to say why they are in there. Inge Morath, it's a series on London. Ernst Haas is a series on a film set in Egypt. So it's a mix of a little bit of everything, and it doesn't really make sense to me. Now, yesterday, Chris Steele Perkins suggested that there was a third crate with maybe more material. Could be, but the name tags that we have correspond to the photographers that were in the two crates, and all of the name tags were packed together, and all of the, let's say, material for the presentation of the show was packed together. So I don't think that there would have been a third crate with other name tags and other photographs. Could be, but it's also probable that that's not the case. So it's always like that when you research and you don't find really answers. There are more questions actually than answers to the whole subject. And we also thought in presenting the exhibition in Vienna, just right after we found it, would help us in finding more answers to our questions. Meaning that, well, actually, I thought if we present the show, someone would come up and say, I remember that show, I was there as a young man or young woman, and I remember that one of the photographers was there, or the curator, or whoever, but no, we have never had any indications from anybody about the show, and so a lot of things actually remain a mystery. So here in Budapest, we actually have the great honor to present the first Magnum exhibition, Magnum's first, and our latest traveling exhibition production, which is Magnum Contact Sheets. Magnum Contact Sheets is based on tool, an editorial tool used by the photographers in the analog times of photography, and which is more or less outdated today. So in a way, this is an exhibition which is a historical exhibition which goes from the beginning of the agency, or even before that, till today, showing the use of the contact sheet by the photographers, and how it developed, and also how it is actually outdated today, because our younger photographers and most of our even older photographers now work digital, and the contact sheet doesn't exist anymore. So we present more or less 7 decades of the history of Magnum's photography, Each Magnum photographer is represented with one contact sheet and one icon of that contact sheet. And we also added different material like books or magazine spreads and things like that. Now, when one looks at the exhibition, one can easily see how on a contact sheet the situation in front of the photographer actually develops, how he gets to the image he then considers to be the image, to stand for that event. And then you actually, when you go to the further on to the slides, the color film, you actually lose this indication of time evolving, a moment passing, because a color film is cut up and then you make slides, and even though maybe in the beginning the slides will be in a little box in the right order, by handling the box you immediately lose the right order, because people will take out things, they won't put them back in the right order, and then it's finished. And also with the digital editing process, you don't get the same development of time than you get with a contact sheet, because you don't keep everything. With a film roll and a contact sheet, you keep every single shot, even though you discard most of them because they're on the film. But with the digital, you just throw in the bin what you don't want to keep, and so you actually lose track of the different moments. So you keep the key images, maybe something a little bit before and something a little bit after, but you don't keep everything, and it's obviously also the fact that with digital you shoot more than with analog. So the exhibition is actually quite interesting for photographers, for photo historians, for all those who love photography, but it's also interesting for people who are interested in history, because a lot of the images we show are important moments in the history of the 20th century and also the beginning of the 21st. Magnum Photos was created in 1947. Well, it's a little bit a legend today. We don't know the exact day and place, but the legend goes that it was in the penthouse restaurant of the Museum of Modern Art. That sounds already quite good. And we know that the people present were Robert Capa, who was the instigator of the project of the agency. There was Bill van die Weert, who was a live photographer, his wife Rita, and Maria Eisner, who was working for the picture agency, what was the name? Alliance Photo in Paris before the war. The other founding members, David Seymour, Henri Cartier-Bresson and George Roger, had given their approval for the foundation of the agency beforehand, but we know that they were not present at that meeting because Henri was already heading to Asia. George Roger was in Africa, and Jim, I don't know where he was, but he wasn't present either. So that was it. The fact is that Magnum Photos Inc. was registered as a business in New York on the 22nd of May 1947. So that's a fact, and this we all know. Yeah, as I said, the rest is a little bit myth. And why the name? Well, it could be explained by Capa's liking to champagne. So a Magnum champagne bottle is a big bottle of champagne, but it also means big. So Capa had in mind a kind of a very big and important agency, so it could also be related to his idea of grandeur of the project. The initial idea was also that in order to be able to provide images from all over the world, the four founders would kind of spread out into the world, and that's why Roger went to Africa and Henri Cartier-Bresson to Asia, and Capa would remain in the US, and Seymour would go back to Europe. And it was a little bit like that in the beginning, but then they started also mixing. Also more photographers joined the agency, so it wasn't that important that everybody had to be in one spot all the time. It's quite interesting. One of the first stories that brought Magnum quite a bit of money is in the Magnum's first exhibition. It is the meeting of Henri with Mahatma Gandhi, and then the announcement of Nehru of Gandhi's death, which happened actually 2 days later, and Henri following the incineration and how do you say, the spread of the ashes of Gandhi in the Ganges river. And the story actually goes that while Henri was in Asia, and he was there for quite a long time, because he didn't only go to India, but he also went, for example, in 1948. So he stayed in the region in Asia for a couple of years. I think that in 48 he then went to China before returning to Europe. Well, he sent back the negatives to the agency, who sold the story, and it was reproduced in quite a few newspapers in Europe, in the US. That helped the agency to actually sustain in at least the first year. When he came back and asked Capa for his share, Capa said, well, the money's gone, you know, we had expenses, and actually, what do you need the money for? You don't drive, so you don't need a car. Your wife already has a fur coat, so she doesn't need a second one. You know, the money is spent, and you know, that's how life is. And I mean, I just repeat what's a little bit, you know, the little Magnum stories here and there, but I think it's a nice story, and it tells very much about Magnum. And in fact, it also tells a little bit about the functioning of Magnum, because the idea of the business plan was that the agency would sell the picture stories to different medias in Europe and in the US, and not be linked to just one newspaper or magazine, and therefore get more income and also have more freedom. The agency did not depend on a few magazines and medias, but could actually distribute worldwide if they wanted to. And also the idea of Magnum was that if a story was sold by a photographer, 50% of the income would go to the photographer and 50% would go to the agency in order to make it run. As you can imagine, for photographers not really there, it was in the beginning more of an adventure than a business with a real business plan, a strategy, professional people working for them. It was more of a family entreprise, and it was probably not very well organized. And so after 1 year, Bill van de Weert was actually the first one to drop out, probably because he got too fed up, and it was a little bit too hazardous for him to keep on with this bunch of crazy people. But the fact is that more and more photographers actually joined the agency. They would sell more stories, they would get more income, and little by little the family business could actually grow into a real business and be more professional and hire professional people to do the work. It wasn't only the photographers who would do their jobs and then the editings and the sales and so on. Well, the first tragedy really hit the agency in 1954 when two important Magnum photographers died, Robert Capa in Indochina and Werner Bischoff in Peru. And at that time it really was not sure if the agency could actually overcome that tragedy and keep on going. But then Cornel Capa said he would join the group, and David Seymour agreed to become the president, step in for Robert Capa, and well, the agency survived. And it was actually David Seymour who was, let's say, a more pragmatic man, less charismatic than Robert Capa, but more organized. And he really laid the foundations also to a much more organized business, making certain rules, creating certain dispositions for the agency to go from a kind of a creative, chaotic style to a more pragmatic, business-like style. Even though he died 2 years later in Egypt, and again it was a kind of a shake to the agency to lose another founding member and another president. But this crisis was also overcome, and then it was just actually moving ahead. And in the 80s, the two offices, New York and London, were joined by a third one in London. So today we have 4 offices, one in New York, one in Paris, one in London, and one in Japan, in Tokyo. The agency counts about 60 living photographers, probably around 20 estates with which we're still working. And even though times are tougher nowadays than in the old days, because the illustrated magazine era has more or less come to an end, I think that Magnum has actually taken some really important decisions. First of all, it was flexible enough to adapt to the digital era. So relatively soon the Magnum offices had their websites where they could actually do the editorial business online. And then, even though there is this really heavy decline of the picture sales, we have also adapted in the sense that we are doing more cultural projects nowadays with touring exhibitions, and we're also doing more print sales. We have either print rooms in the offices, or we even have a little gallery in Paris. It has always been the tradition at Magnum that it is the photographers who actually lead the path of the agency, because they are the owners and shareholders of the agency. So it's actually them who will define and shape the future of Magnum. And I'm very curious what they will come up with solutions for the years to come.